Hello, my name is Tim Shoebridge. Welcome to this video, which is going to be a follow-up to the previous video that I did on the Behringer Poly D. Now, I did that video a few weeks ago. I've had a few more weeks with the synthesizer. I've been able to use it on a couple of different projects, and as well as that, I've also put together a song which completely, exclusively uses Poly D sounds and nothing else. So I'm going to play you that song in a little while in this video, but before we get there, I just want to share with you just a few more thoughts that I've got on the Poly D, having used it now for the last few weeks. So that's what's coming up next. As always, thank you very, very much for watching. Right, so let's just talk about the chorus briefly. It was very evident in my first video that I had an issue with some sort of crackling sound going on with the chorus section here. I haven't sent the Poly D back. I've kind of lived with it, and I've sort of narrowed down the issue. The issue is definitely this switch here, this on-off switch. It's either a dodgy connection or it might be the switch itself. But what I found is that like 7 times out of 10 switching the chorus on will give me that crackling, but 3 times out of 10 it won't. So what I've decided to do is leave that switch switched on, so the chorus is on, and I turn it on and off with these buttons here on the front panel, and I don't touch that anymore. And I haven't had any crackling for the last few weeks, so I'm kind of living with it, and that's fine. I know that I've got a fault, but it's not that bad. Now, in terms of the chorus itself, as a few people have pointed out in the comment section of my last video, it is a noisy chorus. It's a replication of a Juno chorus, and that was a noisy chorus too. I mean, I've got some effects pedals which have got noisy choruses. This one in particular, and I'll try and give you an example, an audio example of what it sounds like. But if you've got it engaged and you're not playing anything, you'll hear this sort of like quiet, sort of weird swishing going on from left channel to right channel, left channel to right channel. It's very quiet, but it's noticeable if there's no other sounds going on. It's just something that I live with. I make sure that, you know, if I'm recording and I'm not playing anything, then I try and make sure that the chorus is switched off. But it is there, and I'll try now to give you an example of what it sounds like. Obviously, I'm cranking up the volume an awful lot to make it sort of like very obvious, but this is the kind of swishing that you get. Right, so the only other thing that I wanted to say about the chorus is that although I love the sound of it, it gives a beautiful, big sort of stereo nature to the sound that you're playing on the Poly D. I end up not using it that much, as I'll explain when I go through the song that I put together. You know, if you use the chorus on every single sound that you put together and every single track, it's just going to sound just completely over the top. What I really want is to have sounds that don't have a massive great stereo spread on them, so that when I record them I can place those sounds within my song, within the stereo field where I want them to be. So it's just common sense. You're just not going to use that chorus all the time. It's beautiful for some big fat stuff. In terms of the song that I put together, I ended up using it mostly with a kind of a droning chord sound that I've got going, which goes on basically all the way through the song. I've just added the chorus to that, and it gives this nice sort of like background stereo feel to the sound. But with all of the little sequences that I'm playing, I'm just not using the chorus at all. It would just be overkill to use it on every single track. Right, the next thing I just want to cover is playing the synth monophonically. Just looking for my little Model D here. I mean, a couple of people said in the comments of my last video, well, you know, why are you in this video playing it monophonically? Well, because I can. You know, it's basically, the Poly D is basically a Model D. You see that? Yep. It's a Model D scaled up with a keyboard, with an extra oscillator. It's got some effects, it's got a sequencer, and it happens to be able to play paraphonically as well. But actually what I find is that most of the time I'm using it monophonically, and it's an absolutely perfect replacement for the Model D that I've got here. I really don't see why I'm going to use this Model D anymore. It just replaces it in every single way. Yes, the Model D does have some patch points here, so there is a certain amount of semi-modular capabilities with it. But to be honest with you, I wouldn't choose this as a semi-modular synth. There are synthesizers with a lot more patch points that are a lot more useful to you if you're hooking it up to modular gear. For me, this is now redundant because it's replaced by my Poly D here. So yes, in terms of the song that I put together, there's only 2 tracks there that are actually playing it paraphonically. Everything else is playing it monophonically, and it sounds beautiful, it sounds gorgeous, so why not use it in a monophonic mode? That having been said, for oscillators, you can create some really huge fat sounds with those 4 oscillators. They're VCOs, they're always going to be very, very slightly out of tune to one another. They're going to be, giving that kind of phasing sound. Big fat leads, big fat basses, but at the end of the day, my similar sentiments to the chorus, I'm not going to use all those 4 oscillators together very much at all. Maybe there'll be 1 track in my whole song that's got all 4 oscillators, because it's just such a huge big fat sound. There's a limit to how many tracks that you can overlay on each other and have big sounds. You're going to want to scale them down, and most of the tracks that I played in this song are actually just a couple of oscillators, if I'm honest. In fact, a couple of them are actually just 1. So it's great to have all 4 oscillators for monophonic playing. It's there when you want it, but I just don't use it all the time. So while we're covering oscillators, let's just talk about tuning. It's been a few more weeks, obviously, since I had the Poly D, and I'm keen to know whether or not it stays in tune, whether the tuning fluctuations between the oscillators is a pain in the arse and a nightmare or not. I have to say, so far, the tuning on the Poly D is really very good. It does go out of tune when you first turn it on. I haven't done any sort of like scientific measurements of how long it takes for the tuning to stabilize. Maybe if I get a spare moment, I will do that. And compare it to the Model D. That might be interesting. But literally just leaving the synth on for half an hour, like I leave all my other gear on for half an hour before I start playing anything, it seems to be good enough. In a long stretch of maybe 5 hours of using the synth, I might have to adjust a couple of the oscillators just once to bring them back into tune. It really is not fluctuating very much at all. So it's very usable. I mean, fingers crossed, it'll continue to behave that way, and I won't see any degradation in it. But so far I'm very happy with the tuning of the oscillators. Right, so before I get onto the song that I put together and explain a little bit about that and then play it to you, there's just one more thing I want to talk about on the Poly D, and that is its filter. I've been really blown away by how lovely the filter sounds when you're playing the Poly D paraphonically. There's a bit in the song where I end up playing some notes paraphonically, playing a chord, and then I do a full filter sweep from minimum cut off all the way to maximum and then back down again. I've got the emphasis, the resonance quite high. It's not self-resonating, but it's almost at that point. And it just sounds wonderful to me personally, the sort of the harmonic changes that you hear as you're sweeping through it. I'm just going to play you a little segment of it now so you can hear what I'm talking about in isolation. I ended up putting that whole filter sweep into the song. Maybe I shouldn't have done it, it's a bit overkill I suppose, but it just sounds so wonderful. It really does sound lovely in paraphonic mode. So here's that little segment of the filter sweep. Right, one final thing to mention about the filter on the Poly D, and that's why I've got my headphones on so I can hear what I'm playing. I'm just going to do a little tiny comparison between the Matriarch and the Poly D. I know it's not a good comparison to make because the filter section on the Matriarch is very, very different. It's very complex. You've got high pass and low pass, serial and parallel modes. You've got stereo mode as well. But I just want to talk about the low pass filters on both of them. One thing that I find a little bit frustrating with the Matriarch that I have here is that the usable range on the cutoff control here is quite limited. What I mean by that is, and I'm going to have to put a camera here later and do a little overdubbing so you can see what I'm talking about. But if I hold down a note and then turn up the cutoff slowly, now on my headphones or on my monitors, even when they're turned up quite loud, I don't start to hear anything. I know I've got crap ears, but I don't start to hear anything until the control is around sort of 10 o'clock-ish, which means even if I put the resonance up, I still don't hear anything till that point there. Which is around 10 o'clock-ish, which is sort of a third of the way round, which means that the only usable portion of that cutoff control is the last 2/3 of it, which means that I get the feeling that that first third of the control is kind of wasted. Now I know it's one control for many different purposes. You've got high pass, low pass, serial, parallel, etc., etc., etc. But that's what I feel is that first third is kind of wasted in terms of this control on this synth. Now that's not the case with the Poly D. The Poly D's filter starts to be audible very, very quickly around sort of 8 o'clock on the dial. And what that means is that there's just a lot more usable sort of cut-off control that you've got over the low-pass filter on the Poly D than there is on the Matriarch. And if you open them up completely like that, you'll hear that the Poly D is a lot brighter sounding than the Matriarch, and that's because of this sort of working headroom that you have in terms of cut-off. Much, much brighter sounding. And in fact, if I turn the cutoff down on the Poly D to around 2 o'clock-ish, now I'm not going to spend a long time boring you by just trying to get it exactly right. Trust me, I've spent quite a lot of time doing that in my spare time. It's around 2 o'clock that you get equivalent sort of sounding, sort of dullness, brightness, whatever you want to call it, between the Matriarch and the Poly D. That just means that for me, there is a lot more headroom on the Poly D if you want bright sounds that you won't be able to achieve with the Matriarch. Just a sort of like an observation. I'm not saying one's better than the other. You can't compare them at all. But it just means that, if you do have people doing comparisons between these two synthesizers with the filter wide open, you are going to hear a lot brighter with the Poly D, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It means you just turn down the cutoff and you've still got the same amount of control in terms of cutoff as you do with the Matriarch. Right, so I'll just give you a little sort of walkthrough of the song that I put together, which might help explain sort of like a few decisions that I made and implications of using the Poly D, etc. This is it here. You can see here these audio tracks. There's quite a few of them, but a lot of them are in pairs. They're color-coded to be in pairs, and I'll explain why that is in a second. But in terms of actual different sounds that I made on the Poly D for this song, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there's 10 different patches. Now the reason that I've got some things in pairs here is because I'm sort of playing sort of overlapped audio. So if we take, well, let's take the pink one for example, at the top here, these two rows it's one segment of audio that I've recorded, and then I want that audio to play all the way through my my song. This particular one, let's just isolate it and play it. There you go. It's a drone. It's just a drone that plays all the way through. Now the thing with playing on a synth that doesn't have the ability to say presets is the whole sort of like the songwriting, composing and recording process becomes more complicated, because I probably don't know how the song is going to pan out when I'm putting patches together and trying out ideas. So if I put a patch together and I like it, I think, okay, well that'll work, then how much of it do I end up recording? That's the big issue, because if I actually don't know what I'm doing in terms of a song, I'm sort of like creating it as I go, then I have no idea how much to record. So what I end up doing is I end up recording sort of a segment of audio, but maybe, as I develop the song a bit later on, later in the same day or the next day or the next week, I might think, well, actually, I could do with that sound a little bit later on. So then I've got a couple of choices. I can either try and recreate that patch from scratch, because I don't have the ability to save it as a preset. I can either try to recreate it from scratch and match it to what I've already recorded, which is always a complete nightmare and never works. Or I can scrap everything that I've got and re-record everything, which slows down the whole process. Or I can start chopping up bits of audio and sort of like looping them together and making sure that there's no clicking, sort of like get the crossfading working nicely through zero, and then try and do it that way. And that's something that I do quite often. But what I try to do is to avoid that kind of fiddly nature of sort of like overlapping and looping sounds, audio files. So what I've done here is a bit of a cheat. Basically, this audio file, I recorded it for so long, I didn't know how much of it I'd need. But then I basically, as it's fading out, I fade in another copy of it. And then as it's fading out, I fade in another copy of it. So I've got that sound sort of like constant throughout the whole song, but I'm using two different tracks and sort of like fading in and out as I go. The issue with just chopping it up and then sort of like splicing it and then looping it is, well, it depends on the complexity of the sound, but this particular sound has got a reverb there, it's got chorus going on, and you'll never be able to pick a segment of that sound and know that you can easily loop it together seamlessly. You can do a certain amount of crossfading, but at the end of the day, you've got an evolving sound going on there. 1 second of it doesn't sound the same as second number 5 or second number 10. It's sort of a modulating, evolving sound. So in those sort of instances, this is what I tend to do: is I tend to record as much as I think I need and then overlap them, and I do that a lot. So I've done that for this drone. Here, this one in orange, you can see the same thing going on. I recorded it. I've got a fade in here at the beginning. This particular one is, I think, just a very, very simple bass. Let me just solo that. That's all it's doing. And it's doing it all the way through. Yes, it's going to be a very boring song. But that's all it's doing. Now, you can hear there that I recorded it with a reverb, and what I normally do is I don't record it just with some effects. I record it dry as well as with effects as well, but I was really trying to sort of like save time and speed up the whole process, being a little bit lazy if you like. You can't see the MIDI tracks here, they're all sort of like collapsed in a folder up here, but when I'm recording, I record the MIDI and I record audio. And generally speaking, if it's sort of like an important project, I'll be recording it dry, and then I'll also have a second copy of it wet with some effects that I quite like at the time. Here I've just recorded it wet, so again that's why I am using this sort of overlapping sort of like audio technique in order to sort of like keep it going all the way through. You'll see there that, so for this particular sort of like very simple bass, this is the MIDI that I ended up recording for it. See down the bottom, very, very simple. So I always record the MIDI in case I actually want to come back to it and I really want to sort of like change the sound completely. or do something more complicated. So the MIDI is always there, but these are the audio tracks, and you'll see that they're overlapped. And I'm doing that quite a lot of the time. Airplane going over, nice. There's another one here. Let's figure out what that one is. Let's just audition it. So, you know, a nice little plucky sequence, little arpeggio going on. I have not used the sequence at all on the Poly D. It just doesn't work for me in my workflow. I'm sure it's a great sequencer. I just haven't even touched it. I'm doing everything in my DAW. So I'll just play things, record the MIDI, and then, you know, then repeat the MIDI notes. So I'm not saying it's a bad sequencer or anything. I just don't use sequencers on synths. So that's that little plucky thing there. And again, you know, I recorded enough of it. You can hear there's reverb going on in there. So again, it's not easy to just sort of like splice it and repeat it. I'm doing this overlapping technique. What else have we got here? This next one here, let's have a look at that. Very similar sound, slightly different to the other one. It's complementary to it, and I'm sort of playing the two at the same time, sort of like build up this sort of this sound. What's this one down here? So some of these are just using one of the oscillators just to keep it very, very simple. That one there's got an awful lot of reverb in it. It's sort of very atmospheric. This whole song is very ambient, very chilled, very relaxed. There is a drum track going on, but it's really very, very subtle. Let me just play a few more of these sounds that I've got here. What's this one? Sorry, this one. Little tinkly sound. Again, lots of reverb. These purple ones down here, these are the filter sweeps. What's this one here? Some chords. And then these blue ones, let's just have a look at these ones. I've got them doubled up here, so presumably I'm panning them and maybe slightly delaying them. Let's just solo those. Okay, so that's a lead. So actually out of all of these different sort of patches and tracks that I've put together here, there's only two of them that are paraphonic. There's this chord section here which doesn't take up very much of the track at all, of the song at all, and then we've got this drone that goes on all the way through. Oh yeah, and that drone I also do a filter sweep of, so that's what we've got here at the bottom. So there's actually three tracks that are paraphonic. So that's it. That's basically what I've got here. It is in total, it's over 7 minutes, almost 8 minutes maybe. I can't remember exactly. So it's quite long. I was thinking about shortening it, keeping it short and sweet for you so you don't get bored. But what I've decided to do is just play it in its entirety. And I also put a little bit of video together over the top of it. Just some sort of footage that I shot up in London a few days ago, just to keep you awake while I'm playing it. But this is it. Maybe it's your kind of thing, maybe it's not. But at the end of the day, it's just a way for me to sort of like show you the kind of the things that I'm doing with the Poly D, the kind of music that I'm making with it, and the kind of sounds I'm getting out of it. So I'll play it to you now, start to finish. That's what's coming up next. As always, thank you very, very much for watching.